Testing. This is the airframe oral section, starting out with Subject A. What are the 4 common basic stresses on an aircraft? They are tension, compression, shear, and bearing. What is the grip length of a rivet? The grip length is the combined thickness of the materials to be joined by the rivet. Where are special rivets such as Huck or cherry lock rivets used? They are used in places where access to both sides of the rivet structure isn't possible, or where limited space will not permit the use of a bucking bar. These rivets require special tools, installation, and removal procedures. They are commonly called blind rivets. What is bonded honeycomb sandwich construction? It is a laminar construction consisting of a combination of alternating dissimilar materials assembled and fixed in relation to each other, so that the properties of each can be used to attain specific structural advantages for the whole assembly while reducing weight. A laminar construction with honeycomb in the middle. That's an example. What type of materials are used in honeycomb construction? Honeycomb construction may employ stainless steel, titanium, magnesium, plywood, resin-impregnated paper, e-glass, nylon, in various combinations. Where are sandwich construction assemblies used? They are used for such areas as bulkheads, control surfaces, fuselage panels, wing panels, radomes, empennage skins, or shear webs. Alright, this is a big one. What calculations must be made when bending sheet metal? Setback and bend allowance must be determined. Setback depends on 2 factors, radius and thickness. Bend allowance depends on 4 factors, the degree of the bend, the radius of the bend, the thickness of the metal, and the type of metal used. The amount of material required for the bend must be determined to assure that the final dimensions will be correct. Bending a strip of metal compresses the material on the inside of the curve and stretches the material on the outside of the curve. However, in the approximate center between the 2 extremes is a space. It is neither stretched nor compressed, which is called the neutral axis. When making a bend to exact dimensions, the length of the neutral line must be calculated so enough material can be allowed for the bend. What factors are used to determine setback? Setback is radius plus thickness. When bending sheet metal, how should the grain be in relation to the bend? The grain should be perpendicular to the bend. What is a bend tangent line? The line at which the metal starts to bend. What is a joggle? A joggle is an offset near the edge of a piece of sheet metal to allow clearance for a sheet or extrusion. What are several methods used in forming sheet metal? Folding, bumping, crimping, shrinking, and stretching. What kind of metal forming is done by bumping? Compound curves. What are the proper dimensions for the shop head of a rivet? 1.5 times the diameter in width and 0.5 times the diameter in height after bucking. Briefly describe the anodizing process and what purpose it serves. Aluminum alloys are placed in an electrolytic bath, which causes a thin film of hydroxide to form on the surface of the aluminum. This anodized coating not only provides excellent resistance to corrosion, but it is also an excellent bond for paint. What size drill should be used for the common shank rivet diameters of 3/32 inch, 4/32 inch, and 5/32 inch? For a 3/32 rivet, a number 40. For a 4/32 rivet, a number 30. And for a 5/32, a number 21. What is a lightning hole? Lightning holes are cut into rib sections, fuselage frames, and other structural parts to decrease weight. Flanges are pressed around holes for strength. When cutting a piece of sheet metal at the edge and you bend the corners in, what needs to be done? You must drill a relief hole. When riveting, what are some safety considerations to be made? Wear safety glasses. Do not point rivet gun. Wear gloves. Don't hold down trigger. Probably some hearing protection as well. What are the markings on rivet heads, and what do they mean? The marking on the rivet head will tell you the type of material. AD is a dimple. A is plain. D is a raised point. Double D is a double dash. What type of aircraft structure uses the aircraft skin to support the load? A monocoque structure. What type of shielding gases are used for GTA welding? Helium and argon. If you do a circle sheet metal patch with 8 rivets, how many degrees apart should the rivets be? 360 divided by 8 equals 45. Therefore, they should each be 45 degrees apart. How is the inner sleeve tube held in the structural tube until the gap is welded? It is held in place with rosette welds. Why doesn't a TIG welder use flux? It has a helium shielding gas. When opening an acetylene container, how many turns is the valve turned? 1.5 turns. Subject B, non-metallic structures. Name an aircraft structure that a honeycomb panel can be used for. They have a variety of uses on aircraft, such as floor panels, bulkheads, control surfaces, as well as wing skin panels. What is bonded honeycomb sandwich construction? It is a laminar construction consisting of a combination of alternating dissimilar materials assembled and fixed in relation to one another so that the properties of each can be used to attain a specific structural advantage for the whole assembly while reducing weight. A laminar construction with honeycomb in the middle. What type of materials are used in honeycomb construction? Materials may employ stainless steel, titanium, magnesium, plywood, resin-impregnated paper, e-glass, nylon, and various combinations. Where are sandwich construction assemblies used? They are used for such areas as bulkheads, control surfaces, fuselage panels, wing panels, radomes, empennage skins, or shear webs. What procedures should be used to prevent damage to the hull when drilling through plexiglass? The plexiglass should be backed with wood and the feed slowed as the drill points break through the underside of the sheet. A drill bit that is used for this purpose should be modified to 140 degrees tip angle, the cutting edge to a 0 rake angle, and the back lip clearance angle increased to 12 to 15 degrees. What is crazing and how does it occur? Hairline cracks in the surface of plastic, a form of heat damage caused by uneven heating, one side expanding more than the other, causing excessive stress, subjecting plastic to large stresses, and exposure to harmful solvents will also cause crazing. When inspecting plexiglass, what should you look for? Crazing and discoloration. What causes honeycomb structure to delaminate? Moisture. What are the acceptable repair methods for bonded honeycomb structure that has been damaged? There are two acceptable methods of repair currently being used on damaged skin and core of bonded honeycomb structures. Number 1, the potted repair method. Number 2, laminated glass fabric cloth overlay, which is applied to honeycomb damage, which exceeds the repair limitations of the potted compound method. What is used for hole filling in a bonded honeycomb repair? Potting compound. What special precautions should be observed when repairing a radome? The repair must retain its strength and electrical transparency. What is a warp line? A highlighted strand in the fabric used for ply orientation. What does pot life mean? The length of time a resin will remain workable after the catalyst has been added. What is a bar call hardness tester? A device that pushes a spike into materials such as composites. The depth of penetration can be measured to determine if resins in the composites have cured. What is done to honeycomb before repairing? Removed damaged honeycomb and either replace with potting compound or use a honeycomb replacement plug. What is the difference between thermoplastics and thermosetting plastics? Thermoplastics can be remelted and reformed. Thermosetting plastics cannot. A thermoplastic example could be plexiglass, and a thermosetting plastic can be a epoxy. What species of wood do you use for repairs? Spruce. What does a metal bushing do in a wood structure? It protects the wood. What type of wood should be used for structural repairs in aircraft? Soft wood. What kind of wood is used in aircraft besides solid wood? Plywood or laminate? How do you repair pinholes in doped fabric? You brush on dope with retarder onto the pinholes. The silver layer on dope and fabric protects from what? Antimicrobial rot. It also protects against UV radiation as well. What knot is used in fabric between the first and last knot? A modified sine or seam knot. What happens to composite when you spill Skydraw on it? Damage and delamination. Are pin knot clusters allowed in aircraft structural wood? Yes, provided they only cause a small effect on grain deviation. What is the preferred seam used when machine sewing pieces of aircraft fabric together? The French fell seam. What are two types of fabric used to cover aircraft? Polyester and cotton. What type of hand sewing stitch is used when sewing in a panel of new fabric on an aircraft fabric covered wing? A baseball stitch, locked every 8 to 10 stitches. What are two methods of attaching the fabric to the aircraft structure? By sewing and with cement. Why is the scarf joint angle and condition of a wood spar repair important? Because it determines the strength of the joint/repair. What is the term for a piece of wood that has deteriorated to the point where when you crush it, it will turn to a dry powder? Dry rot. Pre-preg fabric in a freezer with a defrost cycle will do what? Shorten the life of the fabric. What are the benefits of envelopes on aircraft wings? Time efficient. What protective equipment do you wear when you work with carbon fiber or graphite? Gloves and eye protection. What happens to the fabric when the wood under it breaks? The fabric will crack. What two forms of stress are fabric sheets most susceptible to? Tension and compression. Subject C. Flight controls. In relation to an aircraft, what is the boundary layer? It is the part of the airflow closest to the surface of the aircraft. What are the three types of commonly used flight control systems? They are the cable, the push-pull tube, and the torque tube systems. The cable system is the most widely used because deflections of the structure to which it is attached do not affect its operation. What is used in large metal aircraft to keep control cable tension within acceptable limits? A cable tension regulator. What is a fair lead? It is a cable guide that slightly deflects straight-run cables around structural features such as bulkheads or lightning holes. How much cable deflection is acceptable due to a fair lead? 3 degrees. 3 degrees. Where does failure of control cables occur most frequently? Breakage of wire strands occurs most frequently where cables pass over pulleys and through fair leads. Which flight control surfaces are considered the primary group? The elevators, ailerons, and rudder. Which flight controls are considered the secondary group? Trim tabs, spring tabs, wing flaps, servo tabs, and the anti-servo tabs. They do not alone cause rotation of the aircraft about its axes. Which flight controls are in the auxiliary group? Think of these as high-lift devices for slow-speed flight, such as trailing edge flaps, slats, slots, speed brakes, etc. How do wing flaps affect landing speed and approach angle of an aircraft? The use of flaps increases the camber of a wing and therefore the lift of the wing, making it possible for the speed of the aircraft to be decreased without decreasing the lift produced by the wing. This permits a steeper glided angle and lower speed to be obtained for the landing approach. What is a balance tab? It is an auxiliary control with fixed linkage that is designed in such a way that when the primary control surface is moved, the tab moves in the opposite direction. Aerodynamic forces, such as back pressure, acting on the tab, assist the pilot in moving the control surface. What is a trim tab? This is an auxiliary control attached to the trailing edge of the primary control surface that is positioned by movement of a cockpit control to reduce the workload on the pilot in maintaining a desired flight attitude. What is the purpose of the collective pitch control in a helicopter? It is used to change the pitch of the main rotor blades, therefore increasing or decreasing lift. Why is it important for the blades of a helicopter rotor system to be tracked? To reduce vertical vibrations. What is the most efficient way to check a helicopter rotor for dynamic balance? The use of a balance analyzer computer. What unit on a helicopter is used to compensate for torque created by the main rotor? The tail rotor. What control operates the helicopter tail rotor? The anti-torque pedals. What are the three axes of an aircraft, and which control surfaces cause the aircraft to move about each axis? They are the longitudinal, lateral, and vertical axes. The longitudinal axis extends from the nose to the tail and uses ailerons for roll. The lateral axis extends from wingtip to wingtip using the elevators for pitch. And the vertical axis passes through the center of the airframe from top to bottom and uses the rudder for yaw. When installing an aircraft bolt, what precaution would you take regarding the position of the bolt? Where possible, the bolt head should be positioned on top when a bolt is installed vertically, and the bolt head should be forward when installed horizontally. In these positions, the bolt is less likely to slide out if the locking device fails. How is the propeller torque corrected for during assembly and rigging in some single-engine aircraft? Some aircraft have the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer offset to the longitudinal center line to counteract engine torque. What reference publications should be used to rig aircraft, including the control system? You should refer to the aircraft specifications or type certificate data sheets issued by the FAA and the maintenance manual issued by the manufacturer. What are vortex generators? Small, low aspect ratio airfoils mounted on the upper surface of the wings. Their function is to dampen shock-induced separation of the airstream, which results in a stall. What is a servo tab? A cockpit-controlled adjustable tab to the trailing edge of a primary control surface. The tab moves opposite the direction of the control surface, producing an aerodynamic force that moves the primary. What factors are used to determine the proper cable tension? The size of the cable and the outside temperature. Why do control surfaces need to be statically balanced? Because an out of balance control surface can cause severe flutter. What is a spring tab? A flight control that uses a spring tab to assist control surface movement at high speeds. What tool can be used to measure control surface travel? A protractor. What does a helicopter cyclic do? The cyclic is used to control the main rotor to change the helicopter's direction of movement. In a hover, the cyclic controls the movement of the helicopter forward, backward, and laterally. What would cause an aileron to flutter? An out-of-balance condition. Where can you find the specifications for balancing the control surfaces of an airplane? In the Aircraft Maintenance Manual. Subject D. Airframe inspection. To establish conformity of an aircraft product, the mechanic must start with what document? The type certificate datasheet. What needs to be done to prepare an aircraft for an annual or 100-hour inspection? Remove or open all necessary inspection plates, access doors, fairings, and cowlings. Then thoroughly clean the aircraft and the engine. What is the difference between an annual and a 100-hour inspection? Except for the differences in time between the inspections and the person who can sign it off, there is no difference between the annual and the 100-hour inspection. They are identical in scope and detail. Who has the authority to sign off and return to service a 100-hour inspection? An appropriately rated mechanic may return an aircraft to service after a 100-hour inspection. What are the operating conditions which make the 100-hour inspection mandatory? The 100-hour inspection is required for aircraft that carry persons for hire or is used to give flight instruction for hire. Where can you find a checklist for the 100-hour inspection? Title 14 CFR Part 43 Appendix D. Or you could just say Part 43 Appendix D. Where would you find the recommended statement for recording the approval or disapproval for return to service of an aircraft after a 100-hour inspection? FAR Part 4311. Who can approve an aircraft for return to service after an annual inspection? An A&P mechanic who holds an inspection authorization IA certificate. Who can approve an aircraft for return to service after a progressive inspection has been performed? A certified mechanic holding an inspection authorization, the aircraft manufacturer, or a certified repair station. Does an aircraft being operated under a progressive inspection program require a 100-hour inspection if it is used to give flight instruction for hire? No. What is the maximum time that a 100-hour inspection may be extended? Not more than 10 hours. The 10 hours may only be used to ferry the aircraft to the next inspection site. What do you need to fly a plane past its annual date? A ferry permit. What do you look for when inspecting floats on an airplane? Corrosion and leaks. What condition of an aircraft seatbelt would be unserviceable? Fraying. References to auxiliary landing gear refer to what gear on a particular aircraft. It refers to the nose gear, tail gear, or outrigger type. What are two sources of power used to extend and retract landing gear? They are electrical and hydraulic. When should landing gear retraction checks be accomplished? During annual and other type inspections, after replacing landing gear components, and after any hard landing. What is used to inflate an oleo-type landing gear shock strut? Inflate the strut with a high-pressure source of dry air or nitrogen. Where would you look to find proper tire inflation information? When inflating aircraft tires, the amount of pressure is determined by such factors as tire size, outside air temperature, and the gross weight of the aircraft. Specific tire inflation information may be found in the operation manual and the aircraft maintenance manual, and special tire inflation pressure charts based on gross weight. What is the purpose of a hydraulic shimmy dampener? It is a unit designed to prevent nose wheel vibrations or shimmy during taxiing, landing, or takeoff. What type of care should be given to landing gear shock struts? They should be inspected regularly for the leakage of fluid and for proper extension. The exposed portion of the strut piston should be wiped clean daily and inspected for scoring or corrosion. What is the effect of underinflated tires? Underinflated tires are more likely to creep or slip on the wheel when landing or when brakes are applied. Underinflation also causes rapid, uneven wear at or near the edges of the tread. What is the purpose of the rubber O-ring mounted on the mating surface of the outer wheel half of a split-type wheel? To prevent air leakage from the tubeless tire used with this wheel. What are three types of aircraft brake systems? Independent, power boosted, and power control type. What is the purpose of a shuttle valve in a power control system? Each brake actuating line in a power brake system incorporates a shuttle valve for the purpose of isolating the emergency brake system from the normal brake system. When an emergency brake actuating pressure enters the shuttle valve, the shuttle is systematically moved to the opposite end of the valve. This closes off the normal hydraulic brake system actuating line and allows the emergency fluid to actuate the brakes. What is the purpose of the main landing gear torque link? To keep the gear in alignment. What is used to prevent a nose gear from being retracted with the wheel out of center position? Centering devices such as an internal centering cam or an external track that straightens the nose wheel before it enters the wheel well. What is used in a split wheel assembly to keep the air from leaking out between the wheel halves? An O-ring. What is the purpose of the fusible plug in some aircraft wheels? It is designed to melt at a specific temperature and relieve air pressure to prevent the tire from blowing out or damaging the wheel. How should aircraft tires be stored? They should be stored in a cool, dry place away from chemicals oil, or sunlight? What is the most important maintenance consideration for aircraft tires? Proper inflation. What safety procedure should be followed when inflating tires in general? They should be inflated inside of a cage whenever possible. What is the purpose of the anti-skid system? To bring the airplane to a stop without skidding by providing the most effective braking power under all types of runway conditions. What task should be accomplished if the brakes are spongy? The brakes need to be bled. What are two methods of bleeding brakes? The gravity method and the pressure method. When inspecting brakes, what do you look for? Check for leaks while the system is pressurized. Check flex hoses for swelling, cracking, or soft spots. Check brake pedals for spongy actuation, an indication of air in the system. Check brake pedals for excessive travel, an indication of worn linings. What must you do before disassembling an oleo strut? Discharge the pressure. What system monitors the anti-skid system for failures? The anti-skid controller. What condition will cause the landing gear warning horn to sound? Gear up and throttle retarded. Where can you find instructions for jacking one wheel of an aircraft to change a tire? The Aircraft Maintenance Manual. Subject F. Hydraulic and pneumatic systems. Hydraulic system liquids are used primarily for what? They are used primarily to transmit and distribute forces to various units to be actuated. What are the three principal categories of hydraulic fluids? Mineral-based, 5606, polyalpha olefin, 83282, and phosphate ester, or Skydrol. What is the color of a mineral-based hydraulic fluid? Red. How do you determine which type of hydraulic fluid to use for a specific system? The type of fluid is specified in the Aircraft Maintenance Manual or on the instruction plate attached to the reservoir on the unit being serviced. What will happen to the seals in a vegetable-based hydraulic system if it is serviced with mineral-based or phosphate ester-based fluids? The seals will swell, break down, and block the system. When installing a chevron seal, what must be considered? A chevron seal is directional and must be installed with pressure going toward the open side of the seal. When hydraulic lines have been disconnected, what precautions should be taken to prevent contamination of the system? All hydraulic lines and fittings should be capped or plugged immediately after disconnecting. What happens to the hydraulic fluid flow if the filter element becomes clogged with foreign matter? There is a bypass valve which routes the hydraulic fluid directly from the inlet port to the outlet port of the pump. What is a micronic filter? A filter with a paper element. Name the filters used in aircraft pneumatic systems. Paper pleated and screen type. Why are some hydraulic reservoirs pressurized? To ensure a positive flow of fluid to the engine-driven pump at high altitudes. What methods are used to pressurize hydraulic reservoirs? Some systems use a variable displacement hydraulic pump, engine bleed air, or hydraulic system pressure acting on a small piston inside the reservoir. Another method is an aspirator or venturi. What are the two types of accumulator housings? Spherical and cylindrical. Name 3 types of hydraulic accumulators: the diaphragm type, the bladder type, and the piston type. What is the purpose of a pressure relief valve in a hydraulic system? It is to limit the amount of pressure in the system. It is, in effect, a system safety valve. What is the purpose of an unloading valve in a closed hydraulic system? The unloading valve is designed to provide a low pressure path for fluid to flow from the pump back to the reservoir when the system has no flow requirements. The unloading valve also acts as a pressure regulator. What type of hydraulic system has the drive motor, hydraulic pump, and hydraulic reservoir all in one unit? The power pack. What is the function of a wing flap overload valve? The purpose of the valve is to prevent possible structural damage to the flaps or flap system that might result from the flaps being lowered at excessive speeds. What is the purpose of the shearable section in a hydraulic pump? In the event the pump was to seize, the shear section will disconnect the pump from the engine, allowing the engine to continue to operate. What are 2 different types of hydraulic pumps? There are hand pumps and power pumps. Pumps can also be classified as positive displacement and non-positive displacement. What pump is most suitable for low-pressure pneumatic systems? A vane type pump. What protects a direct pressure type hydraulic pressure gauge from pressure surges? A dampening device in the form of a very small restrictor is installed in the line leading to the gauge, or at the inlet to the gauge itself. What are pneumatic systems used for in aircraft? Pneumatic systems are sometimes used to operate brakes, open and close doors, starting, pump driving, and operating emergency brakes. What happens to the air after a pneumatic system is operated? The air is dumped overboard. Why should a pneumatic system be purged periodically? To remove contamination, moisture, or oil from the components and lines. What is the purpose of the relief valve in a pneumatic system? The relief valve protects the system against overpressurization, thermal expansion, by venting excess pressure to the atmosphere. What is the purpose of an accumulator? Accumulators are used to prevent hydraulic system shock when under high load demand conditions. What would cause a hydraulic filter to go into full bypass mode, allowing unfiltered fluid into the system? A clogged filter. What percentage of an oil reservoir is left empty for oil expansion? At least 10% or half a gallon. What is the difference between an open center hydraulic system and a closed center hydraulic system? Open center has fluid flowing continuously through the system even when the component is not in use. Closed center only has the hydraulic pump to actuate components when they are needed. Subject G. Environmental systems. The production of gaseous oxygen for commercial or aircraft cylinders is often through what process? It is done by the process of liquefying air. What is the principal control element in a cabin pressurization system? The cabin outflow valve. What is the purpose of the negative pressure relief valve in the pressurization system? The negative pressure relief valve prevents accidentally obtaining a cabin altitude which is higher than the altitude of an aircraft. What control changes the position of the outflow valve? The pressurization controller located in the cockpit. What are the two groups of independent cabin compressors? They are positive displacement and centrifugal compressors. What method is used by turbine-powered aircraft for pressurization? Bleed air from the engine compressor is used for pressurization. What limits the degree of cabin pressurization? The structural design features of the fuselage and by the capacity of the superchargers to maintain a constant volume of airflow to the fuselage. Where does the warm air for cabin heating come from in most small reciprocating engine aircraft? From the shroud around the engine muffler. What are three methods of supplying heat to the conditioned air when the heat of compression is not sufficient for this purpose? Fuel-burning combustion heaters, electric heaters, and exhaust gas air-to-air heat exchangers. What is the function of ventilating air in a combustion heater? Ventilation air is used to carry the heat to the places where it is needed. Where does the fuel used in aircraft combustion heaters come from? The aircraft fuel tanks. What controls the temperature in an aircraft cabin that is heated with a combustion heater? A thermostat. What are the sources for ventilation air in a combustion heater? For air circulation and heater operation on the ground, a blower is used. In flight, ram air inlets or cabin compressors on pressurized aircraft. What are the components of an air cycle cooling system? An expansion turbine, an air-to-air heat exchanger, and various valves which control airflow through the system. What causes a temperature drop in an air cycle cooling system? As the compressed air passes through the expansion turbine, it performs the work of turning the turbine and undergoes a pressure and temperature drop. What are the components in a vapor cycle Freon cooling system? The compressor, condenser, receiver dryer, expansion valve, and evaporator. How do you determine the liquid level in a vapor cycle cooling system? Operate the system for about 5 minutes to reach a stabilized condition and then observe the flow of Freon through a sight glass. A steady flow indicates sufficient charge. If Freon is low, bubbles will appear in the sight glass. How is the vapor cycle cooling system compressor lubricated? Specialized refrigerant oil. What are the components of a continuous flow oxygen system? Oxygen will flow continuously from a high pressure cylinder through a high pressure line to the pressure regulation reducing valve. The oxygen will then flow through a calibrated orifice in the outlet, controlling the amount of oxygen delivered to the rebreathing mask. What must be done if an oxygen system has been depleted and not recharged within 2 hours? It must be purged with dry nitrogen or dry air and oxygen. What safety considerations must be observed when filling oxygen cylinders? Oxygen cylinders should be filled in an oil-free environment. The mechanic who fills the cylinders should not have any petroleum products on their clothes, hands, or in their hair. What is the main chemical agent inside of an oxygen generator? Sodium chlorate is the main chemical agent used in an aviation oxygen generator. The chemical is ignited by a spark emitting cap, and when it burns, O2 is generated. These systems are lighter and less complex than the oxygen storage-based systems. The main drawback of oxygen generators is that once the burning of the sodium chlorate begins, it cannot be stopped until the chemical is consumed. How are high and low pressure oxygen cylinders identified? High pressure 1800 to 1850 psi oxygen cylinders are green in color and have the words "Aviators Breathing Oxygen" stenciled lengthwise in white, 1-inch letters. Low pressure 400 to 425 psi cylinders are painted light yellow. What are the 3 ways supplemental oxygen can be carried in an aircraft? As liquid oxygen, a high-pressure gas, or a chemical candle. What is an acceptable lubricant for installing oxygen system fittings? Teflon or water-based lubricants. What type or grade of oxygen must be used in aircraft? Aviators grade breathing oxygen. What is a Roots blower? A type of engine-driven compressor. What is a British thermal unit? It is a unit of heat defined as the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. How does a water separator work in an aircraft air conditioning system? It operates using centrifugal force to spin out the water of the air. How many people does it take to service an oxygen system? 2. One to apply pressure and the other one to monitor the gauge. Name 2 types of air conditioning systems: vapor cycle and air cycle machine. What are the sources of ventilating air in a combustion heater? Ram air while flying, electric blower on the ground. There are usually 2 parts to any instrument or instrument system. What are they? One part senses the situation and the other part displays it. So, sensory and indication. What 3 flight instruments are normally operated from the pitot-static system? The airspeed indicator is connected to the pitot and static pressure sources. The altimeter and vertical speed indicator are connected to the static pressure source only. What instrument indications will result if the static pressure line becomes disconnected inside of the cabin of a pressurized aircraft? The altimeter and airspeed indications will both be lower than normal, and the vertical speed indicator will indicate a momentary descent, then return to 0. Who is authorized to perform tests to calibrate an altimeter? The manufacturer or a certified repair station. What is required after replacement of components connected to the pitot-static system? A leak test. In wet-type vacuum pumps, what are the vanes made from? Steel. How are vanes of a wet-type pump lubricated? Engine oil. What are the sources of power to gyroscopic instrument operation? Gyroscopic instruments can be operated either by a vacuum, electricity, or positive air pressure. What causes an electric-driven gyro rotor to tilt when the aircraft is turned? Gyroscopic precession. What is used as a guide for range marking of aircraft instruments? The aircraft specifications or type certificate data sheets, and the specific aircraft maintenance manual or flight manual. Where are instrument range markings placed? They are applied to the outer edge of the cover glass or over the calibrations on the dial face of the instrument. What other type of mark is required when the range markings are applied to the glass instrument cover? An index mark, which is a white line extending from the glass cover onto the instrument case to indicate slippage of the glass. Glass slippage would cause the range markings to be in error. What is a synchro-type remote indicating system? These systems can be used to show movement and position of landing gear, wing flaps, oil cooler doors, or other movable parts of the aircraft. A synchro system is an electrical system used for transmitting information from one point to another. The 3 most common synchro systems are the autosyn, self-syn, and magnesyn. What type of fuel quantity system is an electric fuel measuring device that accurately determines density weight of the type of fuel in the tanks of the aircraft? A capacitor fuel type quantity system. What is meant by swinging a compass? It is the adjustment of the north to south and east to west magnets to reduce deviation, which are magnetic influences of the aircraft structure and electrical systems. When inspecting a magnetic compass, the bowl should be filled with liquid and should not contain any bubbles or discolorations. What is the purpose of the liquid in the bowl? It is to dampen the oscillations of the float. What is the fluid used in a magnetic compass? A clear fluid such as kerosene. Where is the compass correction card placed? Near the compass and in plain sight of the pilot. Which instrument is used to indicate the speed of the crankshaft of a reciprocating engine and the speed of the main rotor assembly in a turbine engine? A tachometer. What type of indicating system is used to indicate turbine engine exhaust gas temperature? EGT. A thermocouple system. What does the manifold pressure gauge indicate when the engine is not operating? Atmospheric pressure. What is used to check a manifold pressure gauge for correct indication when the engine is not operating? Either a barometer or an altimeter after it has been set to 0. Barometer. What is the meaning of the yellow range on an airspeed indicator? The yellow arc designates the cautionary range. What does a Mach meter indicate? The ratio of aircraft speed to the speed of sound at a particular altitude and temperature during any time in flight. Why do you not try to remove a blockage in a pitot system? To prevent further damage to the pitot system. What force affects all rotary type instruments? Gyroscopic precession. What does the EFIS stand for, and what is its function? Electronic Flight Instrument System. EFIS uses a dedicated signal generators to drive 2 independent displays in the center of the basic T. The altitude indicator and directional gyro are replaced by a cathode ray tube. What device on a leading edge of a wing indicates a stall? A reed type indicator. What is ADS-B? Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. What is the purpose of an engine indicating and crew alerting system? ECAS. The system monitors aircraft systems for the pilot and displays engine and airframe parameters. How does a strobe light work? A capacitor steps up the voltage and then discharges it. How many numbers are there in the binary system? 2. What is byte in terms of avionics? Built-in test equipment. When are tachometers overhauled? When they are out of tolerance. What does EFIS indicate? Major aircraft parameters. What system automatically maintains engine thrust? Automated Flight Control System, AFCS. What two-element system determines pressure and location? Compass gyro. If an aircraft is approaching an airport, what instrument is used to set altitude? Altimeter. Subject I. Communication and navigation systems. What is the actuating output element component of an autopilot system? A servo. Name the basic components of a communication system. They are the microphone, transmitter, transmitting antenna, receiving antenna, receiver, and headset. What are the most common communication systems used today? It is the VHF, Very High Frequency system. Which radio system is used for long-range communication? The HF, High Frequency system. What is a transceiver? It is a self-contained transmitter and receiver which shares the same power supply, antenna, and tuning device. What type of conductor is used for transmitting information between antennas and receiver transmitters? Coaxial cable. Describe a BNC type connector. It is a connector used with coaxial cables that takes 1/4 turn to fully seat. What are the components of a typical VOR, Very High Frequency Omni-Range Navigation system? A receiver, visual indicator, dipole antenna, and power supply. What are the basic components of an autopilot system? Gyros, servos, and amplifier. What are the sensing elements of an autopilot system? The directional gyro, turn and bank gyro, altitude gyro, and altimeter control are the sensing elements. These units sense aircraft pitch, roll, and yaw to automatically generate signals to keep these movements under control. What are the output elements of an autopilot system? The output elements of an autopilot system are the servos, which actuate control surfaces. What are 3 types of servos used in an autopilot system? Hydraulic, pneumatic, and electric. What is the purpose of a bonding jumper wire on a radio shock mount? To provide a low impedance ground return and minimize radio interference from static electricity. What is the frequency of an emergency locator transmitter, ELT? It is 121.5, 243, or 406 megahertz. How can you determine when the batteries of an ELT should be replaced? The useful life of the batteries is determined by the battery manufacturer, and the battery replacement date must be marked on the outside of the transmitter. Time is computed from the date of the manufacture of the battery. What sat-nav do all aircraft have? GPS, or Global Positioning System. Describe the proper method of routing coaxial cable from the antenna to the receiver. When installing coaxial cables, secure them firmly along their entire length at intervals of approximately 2 feet. To assure optimum operation, coaxial cables should never be routed or tied to other wire bundles and be as short as possible. When bending coaxial cable, be sure that the bend is at least 10 times the size of the cable diameter. Where is the preferred location for mounting a VOR antenna on the small aircraft? The VOR antenna is V-shaped, and the preferred location is on top of the forward part of the cabin with the apex of the V pointed toward the front. An acceptable alternate location is on top of the vertical stabilizer. Where should DME antennas be located? They should be mounted on the lower surface of the aircraft in a position that will not be blanketed by the wings when the aircraft is banked. Why are doublers required under aircraft skin when an antenna is mounted to the aircraft skin? To prevent cracking of the skin. What are marker beacons? It is part of the ILS system. What is the indication of the middle marker beacon? An amber light and audible tone. What is an ADF? An automatic direction finder. What does DME stand for? Distance measuring equipment. What two parts make up the ILS system? Localizer and glide slope. Explain how to determine the pressure altitude to an airfield and how to set it in the altimeter. You can listen to the ATC or tune in to the Automatic Terminal Information Service, ATIS, and they will announce the barometric pressure altitude. You will then dial in that setting on the altimeter in the Colesman window. After you can dial in the known field elevation and the altimeter will reflect the barometric pressure. When can you test an ELT? The first 5 minutes of every hour. What is the purpose of the VOR? Provides an azimuth information for high and low altitude routes and airport approaches. How often does the ATC transponder require certification? Every 24 calendar months. Why are 2 antennas or a single multi-element antenna usually required for an ILS system? One for the localizer and one for the glide slope receivers. What drives a gyroscopic instrument? Positive or negative pressure. What is an electric to electric measuring device? A synchro type device. Ultraviolet and radio are what kind of waves? Electromagnetic radiation. What is an ACARS? It stands for Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. It is a digital data link system that allows for aircraft to communicate with ground stations. What is a TCAS system? Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System. What component transmits or receives for a radio? The antenna. What are two locations where you cannot operate radar? Facing people and facing buildings. What system do airliners use to establish two-way communication with regional centers? ACARS, Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System. What kind of altimeter is used for instrument approach and low-level flight? Radar altimeter. Subject J. Aircraft fuel systems. What does the first number in a fuel performance number indicate? It indicates the octane rating of the fuel in a lean fuel-air mixture. What is the purpose of a fuel dump system? It is an emergency system provided so that the flight crew can quickly bring the weight of an airplane down to the maximum landing weight if an emergency occurs during or shortly after takeoff. Other than reducing weight, what other function can be accomplished with a fuel jettisoning system? Fuel can be dumped from the heavy wing to maintain lateral stability. A fuel dump system is required for all transport airlines if the maximum takeoff weight is more than 105% of landing weight. What are a few types of fuel cells? Bladder type, integral type, and welded or riveted type. How is the weight of a bladder type cell supported? The bladder type cell depends on the structure of the cavity in which it sits to support the weight of the fuel within it and maintains the shape of a cell. They are made of either rubber or nylon impregnated with neoprene. What is a wet wing construction? Wet wing construction is when the fuel cells are built into the wings of the aircraft structure using the skin to contain the fuel. They are known as integral fuel cells. What markings must be placed near the fuel filler opening on reciprocating engine aircraft? The word avgas and the minimum fuel grade. What are the advantages of a single-point pressure refueling system, and what is it sometimes called? Pressure fueling, sometimes referred to as single-point or underwing fueling, greatly reduces the time required to service large aircraft. It also eliminates the possibility for fuel contamination. After fueling an aircraft, why is it important for a technician to wait at least 30 minutes prior to taking a fuel sample? Fueling aircraft causes turbulence in the tanks, which results in contaminants such as water and solid particles to mix with the fuel. It is important for a technician to allow enough time for the water and contamination to settle into the sumps prior to pulling a fuel sample. Why should the fuel sumps of aircraft be drained before the first flight of the day? To remove any water that has condensed in the fuel and collected in the sump. What does water look like when in fuel that has been drained from the sumps? It looks like clear balls of jelly. What is the purpose of a fuel temperature indicator on a turbine engine? It is a means for checking the temperature of the fuel in the tanks at the engine to determine when they may be in danger of forming ice crystals in the fuel. What is the purpose of warning lights in connection with fuel system? Warning lights may be used to indicate when the fuel pressure is too low or to indicate when the fuel quantity in a tank is below a certain amount. Why do fuel selectors have detents? To lock the switch into the selected position so the operator can feel when the switch is in a specific position. Where are electrically operated valve-in-transit indicator lights used? On large multi-engine aircraft, each of the fuel cross feed and line valves may be provided with valve-in-transit indicator lights. The light is on only during the time the valve is in motion and is off when the movement is complete. What are 4 general types of fuel quantity gauges? The 4 types are sight glass, visual, mechanical, linkage, electrical, transmitter or receiver, and electronic, totalizer. Which type of fuel quantity gauge is more accurate than other types? The electronic capacitance type, because it measures by weight. Describe the sensor used in an electronic type fuel quantity indicating system. It is a capacitor that extends across the tank from top to bottom in a tubular configuration. What is a drip gauge? An underwing bayonet type fuel gauge that consists of a calibrated hollow drip tube that is drawn out of the lower wing surface. When the top of the tube reaches the level of the fuel, the tube will begin to drip, indicating fuel level. What is a cross-feed system? An interconnected fuel system designed so that fuel can be fed from any tank to any engine. What is the purpose of the baffles in a fuel tank? To prevent fuel from surging because of the changes in altitude of the aircraft. How can a fuel tank be checked for leaks after a repair? By a pressure check using air pressure not over 1.5 psi with liquid soap or bubble solution to identify the leak. What is another name for a pressure type refueling system? Single point refueling system. What is the purpose of jettisoning a system on a small aircraft? To obtain a safe landing weight. What indicators could be used to determine when there may be a danger of ice crystals forming in the fuel of a turbine-powered aircraft? Fuel temperature or a differential pressure type indicator. What should be done with old gaskets and seals when replacing fuel system components? They should be removed and replaced with new ones. How should you store a bladder-type tank? With a coat of oil to prevent deterioration. Name 2 ways to defuel an airplane. Using the boost pump or with a fuel truck. Subject K. Aircraft electrical systems. What is battery capacity measured in? Ampere hours. What is the purpose of a circuit breaker? To protect the circuit and wires from excessive heat and fire. The circuit breaker opens the circuit when an overload exists. What are the 2 principles on which circuit breakers operate? Thermal and magnetic. What tool is used to measure the size of unmarked electrical wire? A wire gauge can be used to measure wires ranging in size from number 0 to number 36. What are the colors of aircraft position lights and where are they mounted? A green light is mounted on the right wingtip, a red light is mounted on the left wingtip, and a white light is mounted in the position where it is visible from the rear of the aircraft. What are the factors considered when selecting wire size for electrical power? One factor is the allowable power loss in the line. A second factor is the permissible voltage drop in the line, and a third factor is the current carrying capacity. When is a circuit breaker or fuse designed to open the circuit? It should open the circuit before the conductor emits smoke. To accomplish this, the current characteristics of the protective device must fall below that of the associated conductor. What type of breakers are not acceptable for use in aircraft? Auto reset breakers. What is a slow blow fuse? A fuse that compensates for surges and high inrush current by not blowing for several milliseconds. What are the 3 most common faults that occur in an electrical circuit? They are open circuits in which wires are broken, shorted circuits in which ground leads cause current to be returned by shortcuts to the source of the power, and low power in circuits, causing lights to burn dimly and relays to chatter. What size electrical conduit should be used for a specific cable bundle? 25% larger than the maximum diameter of the conductor bundle. What color insulator on a solderless connector is proper for a 10-wire gauge? Yellow. How should electrical switches typically be oriented in the on position? Up or forward? When should electrical switches be derated from their normal current rating? For high rush in circuits, such as circuits containing incandescent lamps, landing lights, or inductive circuits that have magnetic energy stored in solenoid coils or relays, and for DC motor circuits which draw several times their rated current during starting. When do DC electric motors draw several times their rated current? During starting. What would cause an AC electrical motor to run too fast? Excessive supply of voltage or the motor field windings shorted? What would cause an AC electrical motor to run too slow? Low applied voltage or defective wiring or no lubrication? How is the output voltage of an alternator controlled? By using a voltage regulator to turn the exciter field current and thus regulate the exciter output voltage applied to the alternator field. What should be checked before any aircraft electrical load is increased? The associated wires, conductors, and circuit protection devices should be checked to determine that the new load will not exceed rated limits of these units. What is the main advantage of AC for aircraft electrical power systems? The principal advantage is that the voltage of AC power systems is easily changed using transformers. It is lightweight and cheaper. In AC power systems, how is DC obtained for battery charging? The alternating current is changed to direct current using rectifiers. What warns pilots of overheating batteries? A thermal sensor in the battery and a light in the cockpit. How long should bonding jumper wires be made? Large enough to handle all of the return current flow and as short as possible to prevent an increase in resistance. What are the two items that wear on a starter generator? Commutator and the brushes. What powers an ELT? The ELT battery. What is the purpose of a static wick? It dissipates static energy from the aircraft to avoid damaging electrical components. What are two types of AC generators? Single phase and three phase. When repairing aircraft electrical components, what reference do you use? The manufacturer's maintenance manual. What is the preferred method of charging NiCad batteries? Constant current charger. What is the max allowable voltage drop from a generator to a bus bar? 2%. What system components can be used for troubleshooting an aircraft electrical system? A voltmeter and ammeter. What is the most common size of wire used in aircraft electrical systems? 22 gauge. What is a CSD and what does it do? Constant speed drive. It keeps the generator spinning at a constant speed. Subject L. Ice and rain control systems. Name one of the most common anti-icing systems in use. The most common anti-icing systems used are thermal pneumatic, thermoelectric, and chemical. Describe the operating principle of inflator de-icer boots. Pneumatic de-icing systems use rubber inflatable boots inflated in sequences to break away accumulated ice along the leading edge. Both wings must inflate and deflate at the same time to maintain lateral stability. Why is it so critical to prevent the formation of ice on aircraft wings and control surfaces? Ice formation distorts the shape of the wing and air flowing over it, reducing aerodynamic lift. Also, ice weighs the aircraft down, adding stress to the airframe. What are two methods of inflating pneumatic de-icer boots? Either by an engine-driven pump, otherwise known as a vacuum pump, or bleed air from the turbine engine compressor. What methods are used to attach de-icer boots to leading edges of the wing and tail surfaces? They are attached by bonding the surface with cement, fairing strips and screws, or a combination of both methods. What is the purpose of an air-oil separator in a pneumatic de-icing system? To remove the oil and prevent deterioration of the de-icing boots. What is used to clean de-icer boots? Soap and water. What must be done before you can make a cold patch repair to a de-icer boot? Clean and rough the surface of the boot and patch. Glue and attach. What component of a pneumatic de-icer system normally allows suction to be supplied to the boots to hold them down in flight? A solenoid distributor valve. Describe the operating principle for thermal anti-icing systems. Hot air is passed through the space between the skins, and the heat is sufficient to prevent formation of ice or to melt any ice next to the skin. The heated air is supplied continuously if the anti-icing system is turned on. How can you determine if the heater in a pitot tube is working? Turn it on and feel for heat coming from it. What methods are used to supply heated air for thermal anti-icing systems? Bleed air from the turbine engine compressor, engine exhaust heat exchangers, and ram air heated by a combustion heater. How is overheating prevented in a thermal anti-icing system using bleed air? A thermal switch will cause a shutoff valve to close and stop the flow of bleed air when the temperature of the leading edge reaches approximately 185 degrees Fahrenheit. When the temperature drops, the valve opens and the hot bleed air enters the wing once again. What is the purpose of the de-ice boot electrical timer? To inflate the boots symmetrically, or in the case of an electrical system, to cycle each boot individually, preventing excessive load on the electrical system. In a thermal anti-icing system, what happens to the air after it has been heated to the leading edge of the wing? The air is exhausted to the atmosphere at the wingtip or at points where the formation could be critical. What problems are associated with electrically heated windshields? Delamination, arcing, scratches, and discoloration. What is windshield delamination? Separation of the windshield plies. What does arcing usually indicate in an electrically heated windshield? Arcing usually indicates that there is a breakdown in the conductive coating. Name the 3 methods for removing rain from aircraft windshields. Wipers, pneumatic systems, and chemical repellent. What type of power is used to operate windshield wiper systems? Electrical or hydraulic power? What are common problems encountered with windshield wipers? The tendency of aerodynamic forces to reduce the wiper blade loading pressure on the windshield, which causes ineffective wiping or streaking. Another problem is achieving fast enough wiper oscillation. How does a pneumatic rain removal system work? This method uses high air pressure. The high temperature engine compressor bleed air is blown across the windshield. This air blast forms a barrier that prevents raindrops from striking the windshield surface. Why should your windshield wipers not be operated when the windshield wipers are dry? They can scratch the glass. Subject M. Airframe fire protection systems. What are the 2 most common types of portable fire extinguishers used in cabins or flight decks? The most common types are halon, 1211, and water. In what area of an aircraft would you find carbon monoxide detectors? Carbon monoxide detectors are commonly used to check for the presence of carbon monoxide in aircraft cabins and cockpits, where they are easily visible. What color does a carbon monoxide detector change when the carbon monoxide fumes are present? The silica gel turns a shade of green. What are 2 types of smoke detectors? Photoelectric and ionization. Where are smoke detectors used in the aircraft? Baggage compartments and the lavatory. How are thermal switches wired in thermal switch fire detection systems? They are wired in parallel with each other, but in series with the warning lights. Describe the operating principle of a thermal fire switch detection system. A thermal switch system consists of 1 or more lights which are energized by aircraft power when connected to the circuit by a thermal switch. The thermal switches are heat-sensitive units that complete the circuit at a certain temperature. Describe the operating principle of a continuous loop fire detection system. A continuous loop detector consists of 1 or more wires embedded in a special ceramic core inside of a conductive tube. In the case of a fire or an overheat condition, the ceramic's core resistance drops, allowing the current to flow between the signal wire and the conductive tube, lighting a warning light. How does a thermocouple fire detection system differ from a thermal switch system? A thermocouple depends upon the rate of temperature rise and will not give a warning when the engine overheats slowly or a short circuit develops. What are two types of fire extinguishing systems? The high rate of discharge (HRD) system that uses halon and conventional fire systems that use carbon dioxide. What type extinguishing agent is usually found in an HRD system? Halogenated hydrocarbons such as halon. What type extinguishing agent is usually associated with a conventional type extinguishing system? This system usually contains CO2 but may use any other adequate agent. What is the purpose of the yellow disc in a CO2 fire extinguishing system? It is the system discharge indicator disc, and it indicates which bank of bottles has been emptied through normal discharge. How can you determine the charge of a CO2 extinguisher? By weighing it. In a turbine engine, halon fire extinguishing system, how are bottles discharged? By an explosive discharge cartridge called a squib. How is a halon fire extinguishing system protected from temperature rises more than set limits? The system is equipped with a thermal fuse that will melt at high temperatures and will blow the red discharge indicator disc. How does ambient temperature affect the pressure reading on a fire extinguisher? Low temperatures will decrease the absolute pressure and high temperatures will increase the absolute pressure. What type of fire extinguisher is recommended for brake fires? A dry powder extinguisher. How can you determine the service life of a fire extinguisher discharge cartridge? By the manufacturer's date stamped on the face of the cartridge. The service life of the cartridge is usually recommended in terms of hours below a predetermined temperature. What type of handheld fire extinguisher is available for extinguishing interior aircraft fires? The three most common type hand fire extinguishers for Class A fires are water, CO2, and dry chemical agents. What type of fire detection system gives a more complete coverage of a fire hazard? A continuous loop detector system. Name the different class of fires. Class A is solid combustible materials. Class B is combustible liquids. Class C is electrical. And Class D is metal, such as magnesium. A for ashes, B for boil, C for circuit, D for death metal. How does a photoelectric smoke detector work? The smoke particulates block the photoelectric receptor from a sensing light. How would you determine when the next hydrostatic test is due on a portable fire bottle? Look at the label for the DOT information and determine when the next test is due. It will be 5 years from the last test date. What protects the fire extinguisher when ambient temperature is high? Pressure sensitive safety relief diaphragm. Subject N. Rotorcraft fundamentals. What are the two main parts of a rotorcraft swash plate? The two main parts are the stationary swash plate and the rotating swash plate. What must you do to secure a rotorcraft in high winds? Tie down rotor blades. What are the types of helicopter rotor systems? Semi-rigid, rigid, and fully articulating. What is the purpose of a transmission in a helicopter? Transfer engine power to the main rotor. Name 3 helicopter anti-torque systems. Not tail rotor, no tar, tail rotor, fan and tail, finistron. What is the function of a swash plate? To translate pilot control inputs into motion on the main rotor blades. What are 4 types of vibrations? Extremely low frequency, medium frequency, high frequency. What device stabilizes rotorcraft in hover and forward flight? Some helicopters incorporate stability augmentation systems, SAS, to help stabilize the helicopter in flight and in a hover. Subject O, water and waste systems. What are the components used to heat water supply lines and wastewater tanks? Heater blankets and inline heaters. And that is the end of the airframe oral section. Good luck. You're going to need it.